Immense pleasure of introducing our speakers this afternoon. As Daniel has said, these are two superstars and good friends, and so it's an honor to be on the stage welcoming them. Professor Bello Sage, as Daniel has mentioned, will be moderating this session, and the focus really is on public leadership and business, and it's meant to be a fireside chat where we kind of like talk about their evolutions, and if there's enough time, we could take audience questions. I'm going to begin with Elsie's introduction. In August 2021, Elsie was appointed to the embassy in Washington, D.C. as Tanzanian ambassador. As some of us may know, the US Embassy is considered a senior posting in diplomatic circles, so this is a huge deal. You can clap if you want. It's a huge deal. Prior to her appointment, Elsie's most recent position was as special advisor to the President of the World Economic Forum. She was formerly head of Africa and member of the executive committee at the World Economic Forum. She has worked in various capacities in the government of Tanzania, including the Office of the Presidency, the Ministry of Finance, and the Central Bank. Elsie serves on a number of nonprofit and advisory boards, including Ngozi Institute of African Leadership for Sustainable Development and the Nature Conservancy. Next, I'll present Dr. Jumoke's profile. Dr. Jumoke is an academic, government advisor, and an advocate. She is a special advisor to the President of Nigeria on ease of doing business. Until her appointment to this role in August 2019, Professor Jumoke was a senior special assistant to the President on Industry, Trade, and Investment in the Office of the Vice President. Dr. Jumoke is a respected global thought leader in her field. She was the only African nominated onto the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Trade and Investment in 2016, and is a highly sought after speaker, so we're really glad you're here, Ma. Prior to her career in academia, Jumoke led a corporate banking unit of the telecom sector in Guarantee Trust Bank's corporate banking group. She was an investment banker with FCMB Capital Markets from 2000 to 2003. Finally, I will introduce our dear Professor Hakeem Bello Sage. Professor Hakeem is a Harvard Business School professor and chairman of the board of FSDH Holdings, which includes amongst its holdings a merchant bank, an asset management company, a pension fund administration company, and a securities trading company. Hakeem also chairs the board of Chocolate City Group, a leading entertainment conglomerate in Nigeria, and he is the main stakeholder in and chairman of the board of Duval Properties, a real estate company in a mixed-use development in Abuja, Nigeria. Please join me in giving our speakers a loud and warm welcome.
Good afternoon. I promised my dear wife, who's my most severe critic, that I will not let down the family sandwiched between two highly intelligent women and give a very bad account of myself and my family. So I shall do my best. I think we're very privileged to have two outstanding individuals who happen to be women. One individual from Tanzania. Tanzania, I think, is the country, more than any other country, that has demonstrated how important the state is as an effective agent within national development, and that has been its tradition over the years. It is a country which has done better than I think almost any other country in ensuring ethnic harmony. And it's a country in which Today, we have a female president. In that regard, you stand for a lot. In addition to being here in your own personal capacity, you're most welcome. Now, in your case, a fellow Nigerian, I think that Nigeria, more than any other country, has demonstrated what the private sector can do, has probably produced more entrepreneurs than any other country in the African continent. Our work on ethnic harmony is still work in progress, if I may say, but we're very much trying to get there. But under the work that you have done exceedingly well in ensuring harmony between the public and the private sectors in Nigeria. So you are very welcome indeed, and as I said, you stand for a considerable amount yourself as well. Now, while the prevailing orthodoxy for the last 20 or 30 years has been that the government that is best is the government that governs least. From the period between 1960 at independence to 1980-85, in all African countries, the government was the engine of development, was the beginning and end all. And then there was a change somewhere in the 80s and 90s, and it was the government should in many senses take a back seat, and it was the private sector to lead. But I think that all over the world, that is changing now. I think that September the 11th, COVID, the economic crisis in the West, and now Ukraine have made everybody realize that the central government is key in all that we do. And so I would like to begin by asking each one of you, and I believe I will start with the ambassador. I'm sure you won't mind, by asking you to tell us a little bit about your journey. What made you join the government? How long have you been in the government? What did you do before? And how do you see the contribution that you are making to society through your position in the government? And then I'll ask you the same question as well.
Thank you very much, Hakeem, and thanks to the organizers for having me. It's a great pleasure to be with my sister. We've done a lot of work together as I supported Nigeria, and Nigeria has a very special place in my heart because we hosted the World Economic Forum on Africa meeting in Abuja in 2014, and it was a fun and tough exercise, but we're very proud about the rebranding that was about, and you know, Madame Gozi is a very dear friend because of that, and because she was my counterpart. So back to how I got here. I got into government by accident. My foundational training is for the private sector. My first degree from the American University in Nairobi is in International Business Administration with a concentration in Management and Finance. My second degree is a Master's of Finance from the University of Strathclyde. And what happened was, after I finished that program, the Master's in Tanzania, it was a long-distance learning program in residence. The professors would come down and go back. And as I looked at the job market and the options on the table, I faced the reality that the country had just liberalized its banks about 6 or 7 years prior to that. And so I was not able to practice what I found interesting in finance, which was derivatives and hedging, and decided to join the central bank instead and put in place the financial infrastructure that would allow us to move forward. The backstory to that is that I was born in Kenya and raised there until I finished my first degree, and I was familiar with a much more mature financial structure. Fast forward from the central bank, I was seconded to the Ministry of Finance. We were building out the bond market in Tanzania. I was part of the team that set up repurchase agreements. We computerized the government securities system, and the Treasury needed more capacity, and I was asked to join them, and I did. That helped me move very fast. I was there for 4 years, and in my last position was Chief of Staff to the Permanent Secretary. It was a position that was created. My job was to keep the files on his table low and to troubleshoot. And a lot of that troubleshooting was interfacing with the private sector. As you're aware, at a certain level, you have to engage with the Ministry of Finance, and I was able to act as a translator between the private sector and the government and business. From finance, I was appointed to the presidency, the private office of the president, President Kikwete. I was the youngest aide in his office. I was 30. And the key story there is at the age of, well, when I was at USIU, frustrated by what had happened in Tanzania during the socialist period, we'd go and visit my family, and you have to take sugar and soap and toothpaste. And I just thought, no, I think I can do a better job. And so I aspired to become president. In 10 years, I was in the presidency, and that should tell you something about how systems work if you're driven and know where you're going. I worked with President Kikwete for 5.5 years, again, doing a lot of troubleshooting as well with the private sector. And it got to a point where the chairman of the World Economic Forum asked to borrow me. So he asked the president to lend him to serve the continent. And that was my responsibility, serving the governments of sub-Saharan Africa and working with the regional architecture, African Union Commission, EAC, SADC, ECOWAS, African Development Bank, AUDA, NEPAD. And the key thing was how to leverage the entire global community, particularly industry, to accelerate Africa's growth and development agenda. So then I was on a sabbatical after 10 years of doing that, when I received word that I'd been nominated as ambassador. We are driving a very aggressive economic diplomacy agenda. And again, my role is to deepen our trade, investment, and tourism ties, and our performance is measured on that. I'm being measured on how much more investment, how much more trade, and how many more tourists I'm able to get from America to Tanzania. The last thing I will say is that last year in November, I was elected co-chair of the Economic Development Committee of the African Diplomatic Corps in DC. It was in absentia, I wasn't even there, but they had already told me that they wanted, based on my background in fostering public-private collaboration, to help the ambassadors in DC with better engagement with industry in the US for the betterment of their countries. And so I'm honored again to continue serving the continent as well as my own country.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. And answering the question really speaks to why I'm here. I'm a teacher at heart. Many of you know by now I'm an academic. I was invited here primarily by my former student, Daniel, your MC. And how it happened was, I'm a lawyer, but like many of you, I went abroad for my master's degree. My first master's was at Cambridge University in the UK. And two things happened there. I sort of fell in love with corporate finance, investment banking, looking at myself in, sharp suits and heels. Yes, so, and the second thing was that I was exposed for the first time to the World Trade Organization, the asymmetry in trade between developing countries and other countries. So when I finished that degree, I still sort of followed the path that I thought I really just wanted. I went back home, went to investment banking, even though a professor I had then, Daniel Bethlehem, had wanted me to go and work at the WTO. But I went back home, I got married, I stuck with the plan, investment banking. I had a baby, she's here now, she's 19. She's here, my niece is here also. But about 2-3 years into investment banking, a bit restless. Do I really want to do this forever? I thought maybe it was where I was. I changed banks, went a bit into corporate banking. But I had to ask myself some hard questions. I had a matrix about career trajectory, work-life balance, remuneration. Who am I? What do I really want? And what I realized I wanted most, more than money, more than um, visibility, was to make impact. So I started a journey of getting a position in academia, and no one could understand it. So my parents, my father is an academic, and my mom was the first female registrar of the university, so I grew up as a campus kid. And when I wanted to go to take this academic position because I really wanted to impact lives, my mom was like, why do you want to come back here? You're doing so well out there in finance and banking. And my dad said, you know what? Do what you want. You can be anything you want to be. You can win the Nobel Prize. I still remember where I was that day, that conversation. So being in academia, I think by far was the greatest privilege, impacting lives, shaping young minds, and really forging that presence about the country, about nation building, about development, about who we are and why we do what we do. And then I kept writing and advising policymakers. Every paper would end with advice for policymakers. And my current boss, the Vice President of Nigeria, again, I remember exactly where I was the day he was made the running mate to the current president in 2015. That was 2014 then, late 2014. And I said, this is somebody that I can work with. So I started following very actively the campaign, just from the sidelines. I wasn't like a volunteer, but I was paying close attention. Before that, I hadn't really thought about going into government, but when he won, I asked him for the job. I had the JD, I put it together myself, what I felt I wanted to do, and he said yes. So that's how I got into government. I've been in the presidency now for almost 7 years, and it's been the time of my life, frustrations and all. So his wife is my mentor, and she's here today, and we always are chatting about all the frustrations. It's not an easy road, but it's a very fulfilling one. When you're able to impact and make a difference, even for one business to thrive, then that sense of fulfillment is really how and why I got into government.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'd like to take us a little bit further down and start to tackle some of the problems that Africa has and begin to think through the kinds of issues that they raise and what can be done. So I'd like to start first with the international setting, the international community, the international political community, the international business community. Because those communities have a direct impact on how well African countries do. And I certainly can remember myself as a struggling business person trying to sell investment in Nigeria. One of my favorite comments with a friend of mine, who I tried to get in touch with Nigeria, he said to me, "Oh, Mr. Bello, we are very broad minded in this company of ours. We invested in every aspect of Africa in which we are." So I think that this kind of situation is all. So what I'd like you both to comment on, I'll start this time with you, is how do we change the international narrative of Africa so that we are a place that people feel that they can invest in, and what things do they need to do to behave differently towards us?
Well, I think I'm a very strong advocate about, first of all, making, at least starting with Nigeria, conducive for local investors. Because they are the biggest ambassadors. And so, of course, my job is improving the business climate, And there's a whole agency that works on investment promotion. But the difference is, even if you can focus on domestic investors, is that if the system works, then it's a recipe. It basically speaks for itself. If you're able to work on transparency, on corruption issues, on systemic interventions, and things just work, soft infrastructure, even with all the challenges of the hard infrastructure or the infrastructure deficits, people would come and they would stay. So there's a trust deficit between government and private sector, local private sector, and then international private sector. And there's a knowledge gap and a communication challenge. So I think that speaking and engaging, like you were with your friend, is one of the biggest things, because sometimes people don't even know what is possible, what is happening, don't know where to get information, need hand-holding from people that actually know the continent. And so that's soft landing of people that they can relate to, that they can trust, that they can communicate with, knowing where, how to negotiate the terrain is perhaps the first step. So speaking to this audience, it's important to stay very connected with home, with the current realities, and not just take sort of the rhetoric and run with it, because you may be the only person that a potential investor relates to or asks questions from. So if you're sort of repeating or parroting just broad narratives without going into really understanding the people, the institutions, and it's nuanced, because as bad as people just paint with a sweeping brush, oh, Africa, challenges, this, that, there's a lot happening. And knowing how to maneuver is really what would encourage and keep the aftercare, also keep those businesses. A lot of people invest in the continent, on the continent very quietly and are doing very well, but it's not their job to sort of share our own story. We have to know the story, own it, and then speak about it, not just speak about the sort of problems and negatives. I think a lot of the time we can massage those. The good stories by far outweigh in weight in terms of what the continent in a very short time has been able to do.
So I have a privileged position, having had the honor of serving as head of Africa, because the big part of that was telling the narrative and marketing Africa and competing with my colleagues who are responsible for North America, for Latin America, Asia, India, Japan, Europe, for resources, because when you're talking about tapping into different stakeholders, you're talking about resources. It may be knowledge, it may be investment, it may be a willingness to partner. And I hate to say it, but Africa is still irrelevant outside of Africa. That's the bottom line. And there are very real reasons for that. There's a lot more news about other parts of the world, and I speak as someone who lived in Geneva for the past 10 years, and also with my time here, that's still very much echoed. From an American point of view, Africa is still irrelevant. We're fighting to get it back on the table as ambassadors and to deepen the engagement and visibility that we receive vis-a-vis other regions of the world. So remember, we're always competing and being compared to others. A key reason for the irrelevance is the cost of doing business in Africa. In the World Economic Forum, they have a global competitiveness index they put out for the entire time I was at the forum, and it's still the case now. Africa was lagging at the bottom vis-a-vis other regions in terms of competitiveness. And what that means is that it costs more to do something in Africa than to do something in China, for example. So, and from a business perspective, hey, business needs to make money. So why should I invest so much of my own money, or for companies that are listed, the company's money for smaller margins? So that's something we have to address, and this is some of the things we did sort of with Jumoke, and using the example of Nigeria and Kenya and the strides they were able to make. And by the way, when I say Africa, it's outside of South Africa. They're compared very differently to the rest. The second thing I want to echo, Hakim, you put it very well, is bridges. Again, I'll use the example of the forum. The role the forum played was to act as a safe space and a bridge for investors who were curious about Africa, who are interested after hearing the narrative about what is actually happening in Africa, to go and see for themselves. It is very common, and I think we can all be honest here, for you to ask for a meeting with a minister or key official in the government, take months to get feedback, and then you arrive, they make you sit for hours, and then say you go back and come back next month. Something's come up. That's totally unacceptable from a European point of view, American. There's a particular worldview, but it's just not how business works. And so finding safe ways, which is what we did with the forum, to completely control the environment where business could meet with government and have the discussions about what was actually going on. My last point on this is that we need to amplify our own stories about the reality on the ground. Because international media has very limited space for Africa. So it's not that nothing is happening. A lot has happened. We've come a long way over the last decade. But we need to claim more airspace, tell our own stories, tell our positive stories. The world is not a perfect place. So Africa is not the only place that has a special relationship with negative attributes. They're global, but how come in other countries and regions they amplify the positive stories, and those stand out much more. And that's up to us, it's up to all of you to think about how you get your story out in the different spaces that you are in.
Thank you very much. And if I could just amplify what both of you said. When you look at 3 countries in the Middle East, and I think the Middle East is an example. You look at Libya, Kuwait, Dubai, and then Bahrain. In the 1950s, 1960s, each of these countries was producing roughly the same volume of oil and exporting. The most backward of these 4 countries was Dubai. The most backward. And the last one to get independence was Dubai. Nobody would have thought of those 4. The international center in the Middle East would be Dubai in the late 1980s and 90s. But that really, when you think about it has been a supreme triumph of leadership and of communication. And they have done an outstanding job representing themselves and backing up what they say with what they do. And I think that a lot of the 2 points that both of you echoed are points I think Dubai has done exceedingly well. So I just put that out there just for you to say that the comments that both of you have made are not just comments. They are things that have happened successfully over the last 40 or 50 years. Now, if we can, to some degree, say, maybe the rest of the world doesn't understand us. Maybe the rest of the world is far away. Maybe the rest of the world doesn't get the difference between Mali, Ghana, Tanzania. Within the African continent, we should know each other. So I'd like you to lead with answering the question, how do you think we as Africans can get to understand and know each other better so that we can begin to work and trade with each other, and so that some of the conflicts and rifts and misunderstandings are not there, and so that the promise of the African Free Trade Zone becomes a reality?
So everything starts with relationships. And we have not invested enough in cultural diplomacy, in citizen-to-citizen diplomacy. It's improving. The creative industry has been a real driver in that regard, as well as sports competitions as well. In terms of bringing together people who normally do not come together, there's also a lot of religious groups that visit each other as well, right? So they're fostering that, but limited in terms of being actively driven by governments as a way of promoting that engagement. So I agree with you. That's something we need to foster very deliberately and intentionally. And this is a lesson also from Tanzania in terms of uniting the country. And this was by our founding father, Nyerere. We have over 123 tribes in Tanzania. So it's a big country, it's a complex country. Of course, in Nigeria, you have many more. And deliberate and intentional about forging those connections. The second is we're still, unfortunately, living with the legacies of colonialism. Most of our infrastructure heads out of the continent and doesn't bridge the continent. And there are efforts being taken to improve that connectivity. And once we're able to complete that connection by roads, bridges, rail, as well as the aviation, we will start to see more movement because we can easily visit each other instead of having to go out of the continent, come back to the continent, in some cases when you're moving from east to west. Finally, I would say we have instruments in place and it's worth spending time. It may seem boring, but please do. There's a lot of work that has been done in terms of harmonizing our regions through our regional economic blocks. EAC, SADC, ECOWAS, ECAS. I could go on and on. It's a spaghetti bowl, but they're making efforts. And feedback to those mechanisms, including the AFCFTA, in terms of how business is experiencing these efforts to connect the continent in terms of payment systems, in terms of cross-border posts, in terms of communication. There are a number of elements that are in place and quite a bit of advancement has taken place. The downside so far, and I say this because I've been a vocal critic of it and have been trying to help these organizations in my previous role and will continue to do so, is that a lot of the policy work and all these elements of connecting the continent are driven by policymakers. They're not consulting actively and systematically the private sector, although they say, we're doing this for you. But I say, but have you asked them what they need? Or are you going to build it fast and then hope it works for them? And then also just for citizens, right? How do you communicate what it is that you're doing so that they appreciate what they can or cannot do? And again, you can give feedback that allows you to improve this regional project, the African Union Agenda 2063. So those are some key sort of elements. There's some progress. Much more needs to be done.
Thank you very much. I must just comment that if anybody had told me that Tanzania had 123 tribes, I would never have imagined. I'd always assumed that Tanzania just had one tribe since you all seem to work together so well. But that is a tribute to the superb leadership that you have sustained over many decades. In fact, I congratulate all of you in Tanzania in that respect.
The delegation is here. Well, I think that I completely agree with all Elsie has said. It starts from really wanting it to happen, not just paying lip service. So we have a lot of plans, we have a lot of declarations, but the implementation. So the big concern with AFCFTA, a lot of work has gone into it, phenomenal. Now it's implementation stage, and not the people that negotiated would be the implementers. So now you have to work with the customs officials, each country's sort of public officials have to buy into it, the people themselves. There was a lot of negotiating outward and not enough doing engagement in the country. The big thing that makes it different for Africa, and I think that we have to pay specific attention to, is that a lot of our economies have a huge informal sector. So the small and medium-sized enterprises, in fact, the micro and even the nano, are what really underpins Nigeria's economy. Is almost 50% MSME, and a huge percentage of that, over 90%, is really the micro. And that's what underpins that whole economy. So solving for them, if you talk about cross-border trade and the informal trade routes across the continent, if you take West and Central Africa and how maybe grains or other goods are moving, a lot of it is actually outside of the financial sector, which is why there's always a lag between Africa and the rest of the world, and even the formal banking sector. So we have to make sure that our soft infrastructure, our cross-border trading, a lot of those entrepreneurs are women and younger people. We have to have policies that deliberately solve for them. And I really liked Elsie's point that my whole job really is standing in the gap between private sector and the government, and especially for MSMEs who don't need to have access to power. I tell larger corporates, your challenges are a bit more sophisticated. We just want plain bread and butter systemic intervention that works for the basic entrepreneur on the street to be able to do their business. As you said, the population really entrepreneurial, and that is replicated across the continent. So governments should really pay attention to that. And with that, I think that the economies would just by themselves grow and evolve.
Great, great. I think that I would like to relate comments that both of you have made very eloquently regarding Africa as a region and relate it to all of the people who are in this room, in the very sense that each one of you in this room is in many regards your ambassador. And the way in which people receive you and relate to you in the rest of the world will shape the way they see your countries. I think I was telling you that the two most brilliant economists I ever knew, the first was a Tanzanian student who was with me in Cambridge called Ruth, and the second was an Ugandan called Tumsimeni Kebele, who recently died as governor of the Bank of Uganda. And my view of your country and of Uganda has been very much colored by the first people that I met from that. And therefore, I think that each person in this room plays that role in the way in which you conduct yourself while here at university. In the same way, the ties which you create amongst yourselves, Nigerians, Ghanaians, Tanzanians, Ugandans, Moroccans, South Africans, mixing together in this environment can play a huge role in the future of Africa. So therefore, I would like you as a generation, to be better than my generation. For my generation, if there was terrorism in northern Nigeria, Nigerians say, no, they are from Mali and Niger, they're not real Nigerians. Or they're from Benin Republic or from Ghana. And of course, if there are robberies in Ghana and Benin Republic, no, they're not real indigenous, they're Nigerians. And so in many respects, African countries will behave to each other in the same way as we criticize Europe and America in the way they have insiders and outsiders. So let us, all of us, resolve that we take a bigger picture of our continent and we understand our unity and that we live that unity in our lives. So we tackled the international and the regional, so let's now go down to the national level. I'll start with you this time, and what I would like you to comment on, followed by yourself, is at the national level, what are the key things that we need to do to improve the relationship between government and business, and to ensure that they both develop harmoniously? What things is the government doing well, not well? What things we can do really well and not doing well?
Well, you know, government is not homogeneous. I understand what you mean, but when people ask me about what government can do to build trust, to build relationships, to build bridges, we are the government. whether serving or otherwise, we are the people, and the government comes from within the people. And truly, the people get the government that they deserve. And I say this with all sense of responsibility because if and when we abdicate leadership and we're living our own lives and we're expecting someone else to build our nation, nature abhors a vacuum, and then our 10th best 11 take over, and we wonder why everything remains the same. I came here today primarily to speak about this because you're the best that the continent has. Whether you're here or whether you're at home, young, bright Africans, you're the best and the only hope of the African continent. So if you choose to live an either-or life, then it's a zero-sum game. If you live your life for yourself and want somebody else to build your country or your continent, or if you say, I'll do this first because I have student loans, I have things to do, and then later I'll participate in nation building, it's a mistake. There's the power of the and I know you all do know this. It's not an either-or. You can do both. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Now, coming back to what governments can do, we can only change ourselves. We can only take responsibility for our own selves. I said a few minutes ago, I asked for my job. I was in investment banking, then in academia, now in public sector, because what motivates me is impact. So it's not that I don't like money or good things, I don't want to grow a business or have a huge bank account, but what motivates me primarily is making impact on people's lives. As a lecturer, I was impact on individuals, and now impact on systemic interventions on institutions. The trust deficit will always be there. Nigeria, we had the NSAS, there's so much. Today is such an important day to be out of the country, because what we haven't talked about, and maybe you'll come to it, is the role of politics. We can have the best plans, we can have all the startups, we can even have all the unicorns and start looking forward to decagons as a country, Nigeria, but all that is in jeopardy by the business environment and the people that we choose to live in charge of our destinies, how it affects generations unborn because we took a back seat and watched in dismay and expecting somebody else to make a change. So to build trust, it takes communication, it takes engagement, it takes speaking, it takes going into those areas that people term, at least at home in Nigeria, the P word, politician, is supposed to be a dirty word, a corrupt person. But when I came out, and a lot of us, while we're out of the continent, getting education, working, exposure, I saw that when I was at Stanford, it was the best of the best that were clerking for Supreme Court judges, that were clerking for congressmen, and interning in the White House. We don't have that on the continent. People here probably want to have internships at the best places they can and go on to get jobs in the best places they can, and it's fine, there's nothing wrong with it. But then don't expect that the continent will suddenly develop and build itself. You have the knowledge, the exposure, the resources, you have the opportunity for value creation, and you don't even have to leave what you're doing to do that. Daniel interned with us before he came here and has always kept in touch and kept interested. I use him as an example because he's here, and of course he wants to have a startup, he wants to do other things, but still remaining connected and giving that value that you can now. I don't even know what else to say, but Africa needs you. The Nigerians in the room, Nigeria needs you. Get your PVC, show up to vote. You plan vacations, you come home for weddings, you come home for funerals, come home to vote. You don't even need to move home. Come home to vote. It's your voice, it's your power, it's what you have, it's who you are. I left a lot of other things and I'm working in the presidency, and it has been the privilege of my life to serve Nigeria and to serve Nigerians, including you. Any business that can say that the environment is a bit better because of the work of my team, it's been a privilege and an honor to serve, even though there's an opportunity cost and a sacrifice. So find a way and plug in. Yeah.
My sister Jumoke spoke so eloquently, and I completely agree with what she said. So I will just complement that with three concrete examples of what could be done to take things forward with respect to public and private sector engagement at the national level. One is dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. We need consistent and sustained forums for dialogue. The world is dynamic, our environments are dynamic. A policy may be excellent today and terrible tomorrow. And unless there's ongoing engagement, right, and a feedback mechanism both ways, it's difficult to close that gap and the trust deficit. The second is to encourage engagements or participation in initiatives that need the public and private sector to work together. This is not just PPPs, there's different ways of cooperating. In my previous role, the organization was championing the notion of stakeholder capitalism, not shareholder, which means you don't just think about the people who've invested in you, but you also think about the community, you also think about the staff. So you are a member of a society. You're not just running an island in a much bigger ocean, so to speak. So there's a synergy that needs to be maintained, and this would be an appeal that I've made and I do share, and I have at least one friend that I've seen here from a multinational corporation, that they don't always do that well, right? Not just thinking about your business, but realizing that as long as you're in the country, you're part of that country and you have a responsibility to it. And back to Jumoke's point, it doesn't necessarily mean that you invest money, right? But just investing time in terms of sharing ideas, in terms of sharing best practice. And that's something you as students can do, and very much appealing to our diaspora as well to participate. So you do not need to leave the US to contribute to development in Tanzania. Just sharing your time, volunteering. I'm very proud to be doing very serious stuff with the diaspora because of the knowledge they have and the experience they have from the US environment, and we're supporting US Tanzania, and through Tanzania, because we always think of our neighbors. We border 8 countries, 6 of which are landlocked. And so we never think of ourselves just as an individual. We never invest in infrastructure just for Tanzania. We always invest with our neighbors in mind. And so there's a lot of contribution that can come from outside the continent to help national levels, right, progress and bridge that gap again between the public and private sectors.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. I would just like to close this session with a comment and something that's a bit autobiographical. And I ask you to make your final comments in the light of the comments that I have made. Now, I think that during the period after independence, we were all admonished to work in the government of our country. I think everybody saw the government as the engine. How can be the best lawyer, the best doctor in the community, the best teacher in the community? My mother was seen as in our own community. We were all urged to the government. Anything else was to sell out. And I can still remember continue to be in the public sphere, you as individuals can never really get any better in your lives. I'm sure that as I speak to you today, you can tell that I can still remember the areas well. Maybe that's just part of the reason why when I left Calgary this year, I went back to Nigeria, the government. I was the lowest paid person in my class, 19 weeks. So that's one of the points that I have. So I'd like both of you to comment on the following issue. In the year 2022, does what persevere still apply? Secondly, does it need some amendment to it? Can we still do whatever things that serve our country? Can we serve our country having care? Do we need to go back to being in the country? But I'd like you to agree or disagree or upgrade the statement that we already made. Now, I know I'm being a bit unfair to you because it may be very difficult for you to amend, but nonetheless, you seem to me to be a brilliant, independent-minded community. So you can say what you think.
Yes, so let me start. This is on. Let me start by first reflecting on the fact that I grew up as a member of the diaspora. And I have family that has chosen to stay in the diaspora after trying to work in Tanzania and they just couldn't take it and decided to live elsewhere. I'm a firm believer in global citizens. Why can other people choose to live wherever they want, where they work, and we insist that Tanzanians diaspora must go back home. Go back home to do what? Right? It needs to make sense for you. But the point is, even in the diaspora, you can make a contribution, which is not necessarily investing cash, sending money home, right? I'm advocating for work in the US government, get into American politics, because then you influence the policies, and some policies in legislature, unfortunately, gets passed here that directly impacts our countries, right? So there's other ways of contributing to support the continent, which is to engage, right? I always use the example, why is the Irish diaspora so strong? The Italian diaspora so strong? There's a very strong sense of heritage, and I'm concerned that we're not investing enough in the diaspora communities, particularly second generation, third generation. First generation always has one foot in and one foot out. But for second generation, third generation, you are, as an American, as your heritage, from wherever else you may be. Some are fortunate to have dual nationality, we don't. Right? So if you choose to become American, you stop being a Tanzanian by virtue of your passport, so citizen, but you always remain Tanzanian at heart. The question of disarray, why did I come here, was actually a member of our diaspora, a friend, who said, is this day coming? I think it would be great. And I thought, oh, okay, this is my first engagement with students and fraternity in the US, which is very much a priority for me, not just to speak at, but also to hear from. Again, this tapping into your wisdom and experience to see what we can invest. Why am I here? And I speak this more generally. Why did I accept this role? I was not consulted for it. I was in the process of setting up a philanthropic foundation in Switzerland and thinking, okay, it's time for me to take a break from serving in the public sector. And with that, I underscore that it's not what we said either or, right? Think about it as a revolving door. Go into public sector when you can, serve for as long as you can, and then move out, right? Our salaries are still low as we work to build our revenues up, but it's not a permanent career path. And so it's really about what contribution you can make. I know what mission I signed up for, and I'm working very aggressively on it to support my president, to make sure that she's elected as president, because people question a woman in office just be about the president and not what gender they are. So we very much need to ensure that she succeeds. And you'll see that even in new nominations she's introduced for various state-owned entities, she's taken Tanzanians from the private sector who are at the top of their game and brought them in as CEOs, reforming the boards so that they can transform those organizations. So it's part of this speaking to the disarray that things are changing, but it still needs an active effort. We have not arrived yet. But most importantly, and this is what I urge everyone, is taking a long-term view on things. I'm not here for my 4-year term, and this I say to my American counterparts all the time. Right? Last year we marked 60 years of cooperation between the US and Tanzania. Nyerere was the second president that John F. Kennedy met after Ghana, and this was after independence. I'm investing and laying the foundation for the next 60 years of cooperation between the US and Tanzania. And the difference this time is that it's private sector-led cooperation that the governments facilitate through their different agencies and strengthening their diplomacy. So we're still building our states. We're still very, very young states. So I said to that extent, still true.
Okay. Thank you very much.
It's true. It's true. It's true. And home is where the heart is. And you are the one that knows your heart. We can't see it. So where is home? What do you want? When you're 80 years old and you look back, what do you want? So if for you, Africa or Nigeria is home in your heart, it doesn't matter where you are physically. It's what you do with who you are, your value proposition, all you can give. I know people that are such influencers on Nigerian policy. There's a guy, he's so active, and he lives in the UK with his family. But he knows every policy, he's commenting, so long and short, it depends on what you want. When I lived in the US with my husband, in Houston, a lot of Nigerians there, and we used to crack a joke that where 2 or 3 Nigerians are gathered, all they talk about is Nigeria. All they talk about is Nigeria. Good times when it's like good food, good music, but it quickly dovetails into lamentations about the state of the nation. But the work of nation building is an important one. And it's not about being in the presidency or in a local government alone. Having said that, nation building is not something that can be done by proxy. You do it with your soul, you do it with your passion, you do it with your value proposition, you do it with your substance, with your time. You sacrifice if you want to build the nation that you consider home. If it's the US, it's fine. If you're a bit ambivalent or confused on where home is, take your time and figure it out. If home is 2 places, that's fine too. A lot of people have more than one home. But wherever you feel is home, if you dovetail into thinking about Nigeria and it causes you deep pain, then perhaps that is part of why you were born Nigerian and part of why you exist. And it will be your life's regret, 90, 100, to just look back and know that you could have done more. I am committed in whatever capacity, whether I'm in government, in academia, back in private sector. I've even worked in a nonprofit for a year. I'm committed to use my passion to build my nation, because my children will never ask me, what did you do? They'll never ask me because they'll know. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank both our speakers. You have been eloquent, you have been brilliant, you have been incisive, you have been very honest, and I have no doubt in my mind that the words that you have uttered today will remain with the people in this audience for as long a time as Nyerere's words have remained with me. Please, can you give them both an ovation?
Please, can we make the applause louder? Thank you so much for that well-crafted questions and thought-provoking answers. Please, a round of applause for them.